We're told in the Bible that Christ was the first in many things. And so this week I was thinking about first and how we celebrate first. Man, we love first, right? Here's the first guy to get to the moon. Here's the first person in outer space. Here's the first female to ever vote. That was a super big victory. Here's the first African-American that served and that played on the Major League Baseball team. Here's the first, a lot of first. And every time that happens, we're like, oh, that's amazing. We celebrate first. We love first. We like first place. When we run a race, everybody likes first place. And that's true, except the resurrection. When the introduction of the resurrection began to be laid out by the early disciples, it wasn't met with great receptivity. It was a first. It was something that had never been done before. We've been in this collection from here to there and back again. We're looking at it from all different angles, but certainly that is the message of Easter, is the message of the resurrection, because here is everything that we know, everything that we live through, everything that we experience every day, the things that we can see and hear and touch and feel and smell and all those things, that's here. There is beyond the veil of death. And there's not anyone in this room who has gone there and come back again. So when Christ pierced that veil of darkness, that veil of death, and to come back, it was a first. And to try to describe that to people looking through secular eyes, it seemed absurd. And I empathize with them. I empathize with not knowing how in the world this could take place. In other words, are you saying that he died because we heard about his public execution, but you're saying he came back from the dead because that had never happened, that someone came back from the dead and lived forever. This was he was a first. And so when we look at these early disciples trying to tell about the story of Jesus, everything was pretty cool until they got to the resurrection. So when you see Stephen, when you see Peter and John, they're kind of laying out the story to people. And when they got to the crucifixion, nobody was upset because it was a public thing. Everybody kind of knew that it happened. But every single time, there's a pattern. Every single time they got to the part about a dead guy coming back to life. Whoa, wait a minute. You'll see. For example, in Acts chapter 4, John and Peter are out preaching. The religious leaders of that day, who were not too kind about the idea of Jesus, the priests and the captains of the temple guard and the Sadducees, came up to Peter and John while they were speaking to the people. They were greatly disturbed. Why? Because the apostles were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. At that moment, because the resurrection came after the crucifixion. So they were sharing about Jesus, and he came from God, and he was, and he died for the sins of all humanity. Everything was cool until they mentioned the resurrection. And at that point, they seized them, and because it was evening, they put them in jail till the next morning. So if looking through secular eyes, in other words, not God eyes, not Bible eyes, but looking through secular eyes, you would think, I kind of get that it's a little bit strange. And so, for example, I'm going to give you a few examples so that you can kind of logically make sense of this. So if I said to you, hey, let's have a contest, and everybody's going to hold their breath as long as they can. And the one who holds their breath the longest is going to get one of the Danishes that we have from our first service, and we've got like 100 of them back there, so not a big deal. So how long do you think a person could hold their breath for, let's say in this room? How long? A minute? 3 minutes? 5? All right. Who said 5? Awesome. You're up, dude. All right. Who's got time? The average is about 2 to 3 minutes. So if I told you, hey, I know a guy that can hold it twice that long. Let's say it's 3 minutes, 6 minutes. You're like, whoa, that's pretty amazing. I know a guy that could hold it 3 times that much, 9 minutes. You're like, it starts to get out on the edge, right? I'd have to see that to believe it, right? If I said to you, I know a guy that can do it 4 times that much, 12 minutes. You're like, okay, now we're getting absurd. This doesn't make sense. What if I told you there was a guy who could hold his breath for 24 minutes? Would you believe it? Let me show you a picture. This guy, his name is Alex Segura. He has learned a technique. It has something to do with apnea and something to do with 100% oxygen, etc. He's a deep diver. And he has set the Guinness World Book of Records in 2016 for holding his breath for 24 minutes. Is that amazing, right? Now that you know that, and now that it's public record, if I said to you next week, hey, have you ever heard of a guy that has held his breath for 24 minutes? Yeah, I heard about it. That guy. He's a deep diver, right? He does something with oxygen. Now it makes more sense. Why? Because you know the person. The actual act of holding your breath for 24 minutes doesn't make sense until you attach it to a person that can actually do that. In Acts chapter 17, Paul is now arguing and debating and discussing with the intellects of the day. They're the philosophers, and Paul was very well read, so he was in good company. And so he begins to talk about Jesus. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with Paul. And some of them ask, what is this babbler, this idiot, trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this, why? They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus, and there it is again, about the resurrection. See, it didn't get weird until the babbler part didn't come until the resurrection. So let me try it again. What if I told you? Would you believe me if I said there is a living creature who is alive, but their heart can stop and still live after an hour? Would you believe that? Living creature, yes? Would you believe it if I said, I've got a bridge to sell you in the Sahara Desert? No. Would you believe it if I said, hey, there's a living creature that their heart can stop, their blood would stop flowing for 7 days? Would you believe that? Yes. And they still live. I love you. You're trusting. If only my teenagers would say yes to me that much. There is a living creature. Let me show you a picture. Welcome to the Alaskan wood frog. Cute little fella. Looks like he had snot running out of his nose and it froze, just to be honest with you. But you can't say snot in church. So the Alaskan wood frog, every winter freezes, his heart stops, and his blood stops flowing for 7 months. Then he thaws out, and then he hippity hops around. If you take one of those little eggs when he's frozen, plink, it'll just break off. I know that's gross. If I told you there's a living creature whose heart can stop and the blood stops flowing and then come back to life, you wouldn't believe it. Now you know that it's public record that there is such a living creature. Now let me give you one more. Paul is on trial. Paul's on trial for his life. And he begins to make this argument. In Acts chapter 26, he's standing before Festus and Felix and King Agrippa and all these Roman officials. And Paul, you can hear, is like it's almost like he's in a stadium, and he says, I stand here and testify to small and great alike. I'm saying nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses have said what has happened. What does he mean by that? Because in the book of Genesis, in the book of Psalms, in the book of Daniel, in the book of Isaiah, in the book of Jeremiah, in the book of Isaiah, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is predicted. No surprise, Paul is saying, that Christ would suffer and as the first to rise from the dead would proclaim light to his own people, the Jewish people, and to the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people. At this point, at what point? There it is again, at the point of mentioning that somebody's coming back from the dead. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense and said, go get Marshall Dillon. Sorry. Anyway, if you don't, yeah. Some of you don't know Gunsmoke apparently, or didn't think that was funny. That was inappropriate. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense and says, you're out of your mind. You've gone nuts. Your great learning is driving you. You've read too many books. Your great learning is causing you to be insane. And here's the key. Here's the answer that is our answer. Paul says, I'm not insane, most excellent Festus. Paul replied, what I am saying is true and reasonable. You see, I would have a challenge with that if I were looking through secular eyes. It doesn't seem true that a guy could come back from the dead, and it doesn't seem reasonable at all, to be honest with you. And then he says, the king, Agrippa, is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of these things has escaped his notice. Why? Because it was not done in a corner. You see, now you can believe that a guy can hold his breath 24 minutes because it's not done in a corner. It's on public record in the Guinness World Book of Records. It's not done in a corner. It's not like Bigfoot. You know how that works, right? Some guy in Canada late at night probably had too much you know what, and so I think I saw Bigfoot. The problem with that is you were alone and it was at night, and we don't even know who you are. That's not public record. That's done in a corner. What Paul is saying, this has been in scriptures for years and years and years, and what Christ did was not in a corner. So the resurrection is not about the resurrection itself, the act of resurrection. It is about the person attached to the resurrection. It's about, if you could understand the Jesus of the resurrection, then maybe the resurrection would not be so difficult to understand. It's interesting when Paul says, look, when he was talking to the intellects, some of them sneered and some of them said, tell me a little bit more about that. That represents this room, by the way. It represents those who are watching online. It represents the people that you work with. Some people are like, dude, that's a bit much to think that a guy came back from the dead. Others are going to like, wow, that is fascinating, because it's all on how you see Jesus. So I'm going to do a little visual exercise. I got a lot of visuals for you this morning. I'm going to do a little visual exercise. Okay, let me set it up. I'm going to flash on the screen an image for 1 second. And I want you you're going to tell me what you see. Okay, you guys ready? So look at the screen. 1, 2, ready, go. Here it is. Okay, what did you see? A dog. How many people saw a dog? Hold up your hand. Yes. Bigfoot. That's it. See, now it's public record, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Get out. That's good. All right. What did somebody else see? A man running into the woods, right? Now, who saw that? Oh, more of you saw a man running into the woods. What does that say about you psychologically? You're running away from something. No. Let's do the exercise one more time. 1 second. Here it comes. Yes, and it's gone. Ooh. Some of you are like, ooh, the crowd was mesmerized. All right, I'm gonna put it up here a little bit longer. You see the difference? You see the little dog running out? You see his face right there? His little tail? This is the most excited I have ever seen you people. This is really amazing. I need to do more visuals. I literally had a guy in the first service, because we had about 100 folk out in the parking lot. I had a guy the entire time this was up. I can tell he didn't get it. All right, take it off the screen, because you see, it really depends on how you look at it. Because some people are going to see Jesus one way, some people are going to see Jesus the other way. It's the same Jesus, it's all about the view, you see. I've got one more visual for you. Who's this guy in this picture? Michael Jordan, right. Now you'll notice that he is, I don't know how many feet off the ground, because from the floor to that hoop is 10 feet. Michael Jordan is 6'6", so something's got to give, and that, he can leap. If I told you there's a person that can dunk that ball without leaving the ground, would you believe me? Yes. Well, now you do, because I've shown you a dead frog and I've shown you a guy can go into the water. There is a guy that can stand and flat-footed dunk a ball. His name is Robert Wadlow. Here's Robert Wadlow when he was 13 years old. Robert Wadlow was the tallest man ever recorded on history, 8'11" and a little head, so we're going to say 9 foot. Here's a picture of him later in life. Look at this. Robert Wadlow was 9 feet tall. And the hoop is only 10 foot tall, so he could easily put it in. You see? I know of a guy that pierced the veil of death. Amen. And he came back from the dead and lived to tell it and saw many people, and he didn't do it in a corner. You're like, no way. Thank you. It's all about understanding who Jesus is. So we're going to spend the rest of our 10 minutes looking quickly at something incredibly important in the perspective of who Jesus is. So if you're at home, if you're listening, if you're in the room and you're thinking, I'm still authentically, genuinely, sincerely trying to buy into this thing that everybody seems so excited about, that a dead man could come back from the grave. And if you know Jesus and you're willing to look at him from a different angle, then watch. The resurrection doesn't seem that beyond reach. Colossians 1:18. We're going to park there if you have your Bibles. If you don't, it will be on the screen. Colossians chapter 1:18 has 3 little descriptions about Jesus that are powerful and tell who he is. Number 1, Colossians 1:18, the first phrase. Christ is the beginning. It's not just that he was at the beginning. He is the beginning. He is the Alpha and the Omega. That means, what does that mean? Well, here in the Gospel of John, Jesus' best friend, it starts like the Bible starts, in the beginning. John writes in John 1:1, in the beginning was Jesus, the Word. That is the word that is used for Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God, the Father and Holy Spirit. And Jesus was God. Now, that's a dividing point, because if you only see Christ through secular eyes and see him as a historical human figure only, then the resurrection of Christ is absolutely insanely absurd. If Christ is only a human being, the resurrection doesn't make sense. If Christ is only a human being, I don't even believe in the resurrection. There is not a human being who can pierce death and come back with their own human power. Christ was God. Through him, through Christ, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. In Colossians 1:18, if you scooch just a couple verses before, for by Christ all things were created. Things in heaven and things on earth, visible, invisible, thrones of powers, of rulers, authorities, everything was created by Christ. All things were created by Jesus and for Jesus. Jesus is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, you would have to believe that by faith, except he didn't do it in a corner. What do I mean by that? You see, historically, Jesus is recorded as making creation in front of many people. What do I mean by that? You remember at the feeding of the 5,000, it says 5,000 men. That's how they counted in those days. That means there are probably, let's roughly say 5,000 women, and let's just say 5,000 children. Okay, just as a rough estimate, there are 15,000 people with 2 fish. And all of a sudden, everybody was fed. Well, there wasn't a major super spawning at that moment. The God who said, let the seas be teeming with living creatures, and all of a sudden, every body of water on this earth, just at the spoken word of Jesus, all of a sudden had full of fish. full of whales, full of dolphins, full of all these things, just at the spoken word. The same thing happened when Jesus was on the earth. Let this crowd be full of fish. And all of a sudden, the fish he was creating, and it wasn't in a corner. See, we don't have to, by faith, wonder if Jesus created. We saw him create, not just with a few people like Bigfoot. He created in front of 15,000 people. See, the Creator is the one that can bring life out of nothing. So when you see Jesus, it's reasonable now. It's reasonable that the guy that created in front of 15,000 people could give life to death. Isn't it amazing? You remember when he turned water into wine? How do you do that unless you're the Creator? Here's the second part of this. Christ is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead. I love that phrase, among the dead, because there are billions of dead people around the world. They're buried, they're decomposed, but there are billion people around the world, billions of people. And Christ was the first among them who pierced the veil of death, and he had to. So you remember those days back in kindergarten where it was nap time? They made you, okay, that's a joke. Nobody was napping, right? They lay those stupid mats on the floor, and you're laying down, and the teacher says, shut your eyes. No, nobody's napping. You're kicking people, and at least I was, and you're just not napping as a kindergarten. That doesn't happen until high school when you nap in class, right? You know what I'm saying? And so all you're waiting for among the nappers is one person to get up. Because when Billy got up, we can get up, right? I'm waiting amongst the nappers for one to get up amongst the nappers. See, the world is full of dead people, and we've been waiting for one to get up so that we know we can follow him because he's gotten up now, see? But he didn't do this in a corner. What do you mean by that? You see, Jesus raised people from the dead while he was still alive in front of a lot of other people. Now, these people died again, so they weren't raised to life forever. They had to die, and then they'll come back to life. But you remember Martha and Mary and Lazarus. They were a family. Lazarus died. Jesus showed up. He had been dead for days. And Martha was upset with him because had you been here earlier, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus said to her in John 11, I am the resurrection of the life. Not I resurrect people. He said, I am the resurrection. Christ is the beginning. Christ is the resurrection and the life. He said, he who believes in me will live. Not he who believes in the resurrection, but he who believes in the resurrected Lord. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And he looked her in the eyes and said, do you believe this? I'm not asking you to believe in the resurrection. It's absurd to believe in the resurrection if you don't know Christ. But when you know Christ is the beginning, the Creator, when you know Christ is the firstborn from the dead, the first to get up from those who are napping, when you know that Christ, then you're like, okay, well, the resurrection, heck yeah. Yeah, he can slam dunk it because I've seen him. We got pictures of the tallest guy in the world. Therefore, we can believe in him. You see? When he looked into that tomb, and Jesus looked into that tomb and said, Lazarus, come out. We're told that many people believed because it wasn't done in a corner. This is the compassion God. This is what I love about God. I would say there's no faith required in seeing the miracles of Jesus and the resurrection. It's faith in Christ. And once you put your faith in Christ, then it changes the game. It's interesting when you look at the space program. I grew up in the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were in a Cold War, and it was a race to get to the moon first. You remember that for those of you of my generation? It's a race to get there first. The thing that held them back was not who could get there first, but who could get there first and bring the guy back alive. right? I mean, there was no success in saying, yes, we got to the moon first. No, he's not coming back. Guy just plummeted right into the moon. But we got there first. No. You see, the power of Jesus is that he got to death first, but he came back. That's the big deal. Here's the last part of this verse in Colossians 1:18. Christ is the beginning, the creator. He's the firstborn among the dead, from among the dead. Why? So that in everything he might have the supremacy. When Jesus was on earth, he had the power over the dark world. That had never happened before, where demons were cast out. He had power over creation, over the elements of creation. He created a storm. He calmed the storm. He walked on top of the water. He overcame the elements of water. Who can do that? Only one that has complete supremacy. Here's the importance of it. We can't miss it. You see, the resurrection, as Paul said, was not done in a corner. None of these things were done in a corner. If you're wondering, is Jesus the real deal? Jesus is the real deal because it's on public record in front of thousands and thousands of people. Paul said when Christ came back, he was not here for just a flash. Like, ooh, I think that was Jesus to pass by. I recognize that polyester brand robe anywhere. Like Bigfoot. No, 40 days, almost a month and a half. A month and a half, Jesus is walking around after he had been dead. He appeared to 500 men, and Paul, the great debater, said in front of 500 men, most of whom are still alive, and we came to us at the same time. And nobody refuted it. It was public information. What do I mean by that? How do we know that Christ has supremacy in all things? Because he showed the world when he was here that he had mastery over creation. He had mastery over disease. He had mastery over the dark world. He had mastery over everything. John 10, Jesus says it this way: the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. Watch. Christ wasn't executed in a secular way. He laid his own life down. No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. And I have the supremacy and the authority to lay it down. And I have the power, the supremacy, and the authority to take it up again. This command I've received from my Father. You see, Jesus is on top of everything. Now let's bring it home. Okay? We might be on the brink of a global economic collapse. I'm not saying we are, but we might be. The dollar may completely lose its value 1 year from now. And America would face an economic decline like we've never seen before. We don't know exactly what's going to happen between Russia and Ukraine. Is it going to spill over into the borders of all our world? We don't know if one wrong move is going to cause someone to hit a button and create a nuclear holocaust that is unprecedented in human history. We don't know. We don't know if COVID-19 was just a teaser to something great. You watch the news and all of these things, it is the job of the media to stir up our emotions. Christ's job is to say, no matter what happens, I am in charge. This is the power of the resurrection of Christ. Does it matter? You better believe it matters, because in all the things that might fall apart in the next 30 days or the next 30 months, we need to know that somebody has proven that they are in charge, and he didn't do it in a corner. It doesn't take a great deal of faith, to be honest with you. It just takes a hard, sincere, honest look at Christ and say, wow, he proved it to the public. It wasn't some little cult over here in the corner. He proved it to the public. And if you can buy into who Christ really is, the resurrection, well, it's a slam dunk. You see? That's the only reason they thought the resurrection was absurd and that Paul was a babbler, is because they didn't know Christ. We know the end of the story in the book of Revelation. The apostle John, Jesus' best friend, came face to face with Christ after his resurrection. John said, when I saw Jesus, I fell at his feet as though I was paralyzed. I was dead. Then Jesus came over. As he comes over to you, whether your challenges in life are worldwide or they're very private and personal, and he puts his right hand on our shoulder and he says, don't be afraid, because I'm the first and I'm the last, and I've got this thing. I wondered what the thing is that you're wrestling with. Maybe the news has freaked you out. Maybe your economic situation, your financial situation has freaked you out. Maybe you got a teenager that's out of control. Whatever that maybe thing is in your life, God puts his risen hand on you. Jesus puts his risen hand on your shoulder and he says, I got it. I got it. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, the word behold means look. I'm not in a corner. He goes, I was dead. Look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys to Hades and death. I got the key because I'm in charge. Doesn't matter what might come our way. One last thing. It really interested me about Robert Wadlow, the tallest guy in the world. And I just started putting myself in his very large shoes. Let's say you're in the 7th grade and you're already 7.5 feet tall. You think, oh, that'd be pretty cool. Not to get in a car, it's not. Think about that. Not to be called a freak, because he joined the circus, literally. The circus swooped him up, put him in the freak show. I thought, man, that must have been tough. They interviewed Robert Wadlow, and they said, what was the toughest thing about growing up as the tallest guy? You know what he said? The other kids kept kicking me in the shins. And you think, well, why would they do that? Because they didn't believe. They thought he was standing on stilts. And what he would do, he would pull his pants leg up and say, no, they're real. You see, there are people around the world, and maybe you, that are kicking Jesus in the shins. Not because you're angry or mean, because you're really trying to believe it. Listen, Jesus pulled up the pants leg of death, and he came back so that you could say, I got it. I got it.